Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or good night, whatever time of day it might be when you're watching this. I'm David Heinen with the North Carolina Center for Nonprofits. It is today, the morning of Tuesday, May 9th, and I'm recording this a very quiet week at the North Carolina General Assembly after the crossover deadline. And we're going to talk today about the crossover deadline and what happens after that. So the last Thursday, May 4th, was the crossover deadline. I've said that word several times now. That is a deadline when most bills that were introduced in the North Carolina Senate or North Carolina House of Representatives had to pass that chamber to be considered during the 2023 or 2024 legislative session. So there are a wide variety of bills that passed the crossover deadline. Bills that didn't pass the crossover deadline are generally not eligible to be considered for the rest of this year. So those bills are dead. But there are some exceptions to that. So any bill that affects finances or appropriations, so any bill that appropriates money or changes a tax or a fee is still eligible to be considered. Any amendments to the state constitution can still be considered. Bills to redraw districts, whether it's congressional districts or state legislative districts, can be considered. The legislature can introduce and pass an adjournment resolution to end their session. So there are a lot of different ways and they can also pass those to appoint people to a variety of state boards and commissions and things. So a lot of things that can be passed. So we're going to take a look now at the North Carolina General Assembly's website. So we're going to take a look at that. That is the website you see on your screen now. And in the upper left corner, right now, and if you're looking at this after May 9th, which you probably are, this might change, but under news and information, there's a document 2023 crossover list. Even if it's not right at the top, it will still be under news and information. So if you click on news archive, you'll be able to see it there. So we're going to click on that for a moment. And this shows all the bills that have passed either the House or the Senate, and that are still active to be considered by the other chamber. As a reminder that if a bill made the crossover deadline and passed either the Senate or the House, it's not quite halfway to becoming a law yet, because the other chamber still has to pass the bill. If they just pass an identical version, then it goes to Governor Cooper for his signature or veto, or for his decision to let it sit for 10 days and become law without a signature. But if the other chamber takes up the bill and makes some changes to the bill, then the chamber, whether it's the House or the Senate where the bill initiated, is going to need to look at it again and either decide to agree on the other chamber's changes to the bill or form a conference committee, which is a group of a few senators and few House members, usually the bill sponsor and some other people in the legislature who've been very active on the bill, to come together in a final version that will be approved. So still a lot of work to happen on all the bills that have met the crossover deadline. You can see that this document has 47 pages of bills. So there are a lot of bills that are still alive. Not all of them are going to be considered. So we're going to talk first about what the next steps are for bills that did make the crossover deadline. We're not talking about the substance of any bills today, but just because it's one that the Center has worked on a lot, we're going to look at Senate Bill 429. So we're going to click on that. And go to that bill. That bill passed the Senate unanimously last week. That would make changes to our charitable solicitation laws, a lot of things that a lot of nonprofits have been asking for. So this is a really good bill that passed the Senate unanimously. As with, I believe, every other bill that passed the Senate and is now in the House, it was referred to the Committee on Rules, Calendar, and Operations of the House, commonly known as the House Rules Committee. Likewise, all the bills that have passed the House have been referred to the Senate Rules Committee. The reality is bills that are just going into the Rules Committee of either chamber are very unlikely to pass, because typically bills need to pass some type of substantive committee. It could be the Judiciary Committee, an Education Committee, a Healthcare Committee, Commerce Committee, Insurance Committee, Finance, Appropriations. They need to pass at least one other committee before the Rules Committee takes it up. So if the bill's been referred to the Rules Committee, That is not good news currently for the bill because that means it's probably going to sit there unless something else happens. So if you're advocating for a bill that is in the Rules Committee, how can you make that happen? So it is passed. In this case, we're looking at Senate Bill 429, which has passed the Senate and is now in the House. And the sponsors you see here, Moffett, Senator Tim Moffett from Henderson County, Woodard is Senator Mike Woodard from Durham County, and Alexander is Senator Ted Alexander from Cleveland County, Lincoln, Cleveland County, part of the state. So the three of them are all senators. So now it needs somebody in the House to take it up. And the best approach in the House is would be, they're kind of twofold things. First, to talk with the senators who are the primary sponsors of the bill. So probably Senator Moffett, who was the first primary sponsor, to work with him, and the Senate will be working with him to figure out who might be the lead for the bill in the House. If there was an identical bill in the House, that's probably who you'd want to go to. And in fact, in this case, there was a very similar bill in the House that Representative Harry Warren introduced. So probably Representative Warren would be the one to do it. If there is a clear committee where a bill would go, the committee chairs are typically the ones who will talk with the Rules Committee chair and the Speaker of the House or the President pro tem of the Senate about getting a bill pulled out of the Rules Committee and referred to their committee, because that's really what you need to have happen next. So let's assume that, and we're going to move off of this bill, and assume you have a bill that passed the House that is education related, and you're wanting it to get heard in the Senate. So we're going to look at the Higher Education Committee of the Senate. And the chairs of that committee are Senator Amy Galey and Senator Michael Lee. So you'd probably want to work, if you were advocating for an education bill that passed the House, you'd probably want to talk to Senator Galey and Senator Lee, and also have the primary sponsor of your bill from the House talk with them to see if they can work with leadership in the Senate to get the bill heard in their committees, because typically committee chairs have a lot of sway in getting bills heard in their committees. Kind of practically, as probably everybody who's watching this video is aware, that there is a Republican supermajority in both chambers. So that means that you probably want to find Republican primary sponsors of your bills to be the ones making that ask and to be having that conversation, because ultimately Republican leadership and Republican members have a lot more ability to get bills to move through their chamber. So that would be the typical next step, is you'd want to reach out to committee chairs in the committee where the bill would likely be heard in the other chamber, and also the bill sponsor in the initiating chamber to work with them to get a bill to be heard. So there are a whole bunch of bills that did not make the crossover deadline. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now because I think we've seen what we need on the General Assembly's website. The first of those are bills that affect tax policy or have fees or include appropriations. Probably the best approach to those bills is going to be first to see whether there's something that would fit into the state budget. The state House passed its budget last month in April. The state Senate is likely to take up the budget next week, the week of May 15th. It will likely come out early in the week, and the Senate may vote on it by the end of next week. But after that, there will likely be differences between the House and the Senate budget, and there will be a conference committee, probably over 3 to 4 to 5 weeks, to come up with the final version of the budget. And it is possible that some things that maybe didn't show up in the House or the Senate budget could be in the conference budget. Some new appropriations, new policy measures, new tax policy changes, new fees, changes to fees or changes to tax rates or credits or other tax expenditures. So there's still an opportunity to get that into the budget. There will also be some bills that may move on their own, that may include a change in a fee or a change in tax policy, or even an appropriation, although most appropriations will likely be rolled into the budget. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen for a moment, just to give an example. And again, just picking a bill that the center has been engaged in, if I can get the number right, House Bill 882, which thanks to your advocacy and those and many others have 34 sponsors and co-sponsors, so about 28% of the House is on this bill, would shift nonprofit sales tax refunds to tax exemption. So that is a tax policy bill, and one that could be included in the budget, but also could still be taken up on its own. So for that to happen, it would need to get through both the House and the Senate because it has not been considered yet. So that right now it's been referred to when you go down to the actions on the bill, the history, it's been referred to the Committee on Finance, and if favorable to Rules, Calendar, and Operations of the House. So that means it would need to pass two committees in the House, the Finance Committee and then the Rules Committee, for it to be taken up by the full House. And then if it passes the House, the Senate would then take it up. So again, then Representatives Chesser or Ross or Sain or Lofton, who are the primary sponsors, would work with the Senate Finance Committee chairs to try to get the bill to move to the Senate. So that would be kind of the natural path for this bill. There are also a good number of bills that did not make the crossover deadline and are not still eligible to be considered. Those ideas are not necessarily dead. There are a couple paths forward for those bills. So the first is that there's an idea in a bill that legislators still would like to see happen. There will be some bills that passed one chamber that will come up in the other chamber as a proposed committee substitute. So they will get put onto the calendar of the committee. The committee will hear it, will take up, sometimes in legislative parlance, PCS, the proposed committee substitute, is the acronym that the lobbyists and legislators and legislative staff like to use. So there'll be a PCS of the bill that may not have any of the components of the original bill and might actually insert another bill into it, sometimes called a gut and replace thing. This will typically happen towards the end of the session, likely late June, or if the session goes into early July. Then many ideas, particularly those that legislators who are in the majority have an interest in passing, or maybe ideas that came up after bill filing deadlines or after the crossover deadline that become priorities, perhaps in response to news events or other things that are happening, or perhaps just things that were still being debated prior to the crossover deadline. Those bills may show up as a PCS of another bill. So that would be another avenue for it. A third avenue, there will be several omnibus bills. Those are bills that bring lots of kind of mishmash pieces of different legislation together. The regulatory reform bill is typically one of those. The state budget is really an omnibus bill because there are many policy provisions in the state budget. There's always a technical corrections bill. Sometimes there's more than one, and often that starts out as technical corrections, which are really just like changing wording, fixing apostrophes, periods, colons, semicolons, etc. Fixing words that are not precise. But often it then gets some clarifying changes, and then some really substantive policy changes wind up in that bill as well. And there will probably be other bills. The farm bill typically becomes an omnibus bill. There are often omnibus bills within healthcare, within education, within a variety of different substantive areas. So that can be a vehicle for other bills to get added to those as well. And again, the state budget is always a very good vehicle for bills. The reality is that bills that have mostly or only Democratic sponsors that did not make the crossover deadline are probably not going to pass during the legislative session. Just for political reasons, the party that's in a minority, often legislation that is only sponsored by members of that party often aren't heard during the session. So those bills are likely to not be considered. A few other bills that will be coming up later in the session, there are likely to be a variety of constitutional amendments. that will be considered. Those will likely be towards the end of the legislative session. Those require a 60% vote of both chambers, but do not go to Governor Cooper for his veto, but instead they go on the ballot. And most of the ones that are being considered this year would go on the ballot in November of 2024, the next big statewide general election. There also will likely be redistricting bills. The state congressional districts, 14 congressional districts, need to be redrawn prior to the 2024 election. So really that needs to happen this year as filing starts, towards the end of this year, beginning of 2024 for next year's election. But also it's quite possible that the state Senate and the state House districts could be redrawn as well, based on a recent decision of the North Carolina Supreme Court. So those are some things that are likely to happen. They could happen. The state budget is expected to be finalized by the end of June. So the Medicaid expansion, which is contingent on the passage of the state budget, so that will take effect. So that's kind of an avenue for that. But so again, if there are bills you're advocating for, if it's a bill that your nonprofit has really been pushing for, it's kind of helped create, definitely. And if it's past if it is past one chamber, definitely talk with your bill sponsor and then talk with the committee chairs and have your bill sponsor talk with the committee chairs in the other chamber of the committee that makes the most sense for the bill to be referred to get it pulled out of the rules committee and get it heard. Once bills get a committee hearing, they kind of start to it's more of a downhill trend, and it's a lot easier to get it, but getting it heard by a committee is more like pushing that big boulder up a hill. It's a heavy lift, but once you get into, get it through a substantive committee, you kind of reach the summit of the hill, and it is downhill from there. And again, if there are ideas that you would really like to advocate for that were not on the bill that made the crossover deadline, those ideas are not dead, but just think about whether there is an omnibus bill that would be where it would make a lot of sense for that bill to be heard. And it's probably worth talking with committee chairs within those areas, within the regulatory reform committee in the House, within healthcare or education or finance, whatever committee kind of makes the most sense for a bill. The committee chairs, and if you did have a bill that was introduced that didn't make the crossover deadline, your bill sponsor may be able to identify a really good bill that would be a vehicle for that to happen. And if you're trying to stop legislation, and that there are things that didn't meet the crossover deadline, it's really critical as you get towards the end of the legislative session in particular, to track or have somebody track what is happening in those omnibus bills when they come out as a PCS, or proposed committee substitute in the committee. They often move very quickly. They may have a committee hearing in the morning and we get through the rules committee later that day and be on the floor late that afternoon in the House or the Senate or the next day. So there's often not a lot of time to do that, but look both for gut and replace bills that are kind of a single issue or a couple issues, or omnibus bills. Keep an eye on those for things that are not there. And definitely, even if you think an idea that your nonprofit is concerned about that may be legislation, even if you think it's dead, it's probably good to continue to have conversations with legislators about that bill, so that if it does come up as part of an omnibus bill or as a PCS, gotten and replaced bill, that at least you have the opportunity to make any concerns you have heard and perhaps address some of those concerns in the final version of the bill, so that the version that comes out as a surprise doesn't have even worse unintended consequences. So that's a fair amount of information about what's next in the legislative process. As always, you should know how to reach me. You can find my name on the center's policy updates. If you just hit apply to those, comes right to my inbox. If you have more questions, always feel free to reach out to me. Happy to talk with you one-on-one. So good luck with the remainder of the legislative session, and that is all for today. So thank you very much.